Hey, what's up guys? It's Jack and welcome back to another video. And today I want to basically go over my entire Mortal Kombat history, so to speak. As you guys know, for those of you guys that have been in here for a while, I grew up playing Mortal Kombat more than any other game back in the day before online gaming kind of took over, as well as Call of Duty later on, as well as Halo and some other games. But back in the day, up until a certain point, it was all about Mortal Kombat, man. And on top of that, it was actually only about 12 years ago when I would grind Mortal Kombat once again. But that's skipping way too far ahead because there's a lot to tell from the original beginning up until later on. So yeah, we're going to get right into it. So if you guys enjoy that sort of thing, I hope you like it. The gameplay in the background is actually Mortal Kombat Deception's Conquest mode. So I figured it would make sense to post this, especially since Conquest mode is kind of like a story action RPG mode that was in Deception that people have been asking to this day for it to make a return. And with the upcoming Mortal Kombat 12 and all the rumors and speculation about that game, people are thinking that it may make a return. So I am going to just go on and just have this in the background because there's a lot of cool things that are in this mode, and it's actually one of the most memorable things about Mortal Kombat. Now, some of you guys might think that, well, it would have made a little bit more sense in order to have Shaolin monks in the background. And while I agree with you, I also have to say that even though it does make sense, I have to say that Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks is going to be a subject in its own right, and the game certainly deserves that. So it just made a lot of sense to me, and I always wanted to pay montage to Mortal Kombat Conquest because it's a mode that I liked, and it's a mode that other people that I know liked, and again, the community's been wanting it, and it's a whole lot of fun to watch. I watched a gameplay of it recently of somebody that did a live com of it, and it was a lot of fun to watch, or even just to listen while doing other things. It's kind of peaceful, but yeah. So I hope you guys enjoy that. So without further ado, let's get started because there's a lot to tell. So I hope you guys enjoy this sort of listening sort of thing, and whatever else it is you're doing, I hope it gets you through the day or whatever else you guys are doing. So let's get to it. So I first started playing video games when I was 7 years old, or at least very close to 8 years old. And then later on, around 8 years old, I first went to this arcade place called Celebration Station. Well, it wasn't an arcade place. It was a little bit of everything here in Florida where I live. And for those of you guys that live in Florida, you guys will know what I'm talking about. It's a place called Celebration Station, and they've got go-karts there. They've got bumper boats and all that kind of good stuff. It's a two-story place. They've also got laser tag that they've implemented more recently. Well, recently as in a lot more recent than when I was 8 years old. Yeah, there's just so many cool things in there. You can get food there, you name it. There's a lot to do at Celebration Station. So anyway, so I was always the arcade kid, and with all due respect, even though I did like bumper boats later on, I would enjoy bumper boats quite a bit. I liked it a lot. But as much as I enjoyed bumper boats and some of those other things that I would get into, one thing that was always a big thing for me was the arcades. I've always loved arcades like since forever, right? So especially since it would be one of the first arcades that I would ever go to as a kid, because I had nothing but a I had a regular Nintendo, and then I would get a Super Nintendo later on. And but basically when I walked in there, it was like heaven to me. But I immediately went upstairs because a lot of the cabinets were upstairs, and I was just drawn to that area specifically. So I took, like, upon the entrance of the double doors, I immediately went to, it was either my left or to my right, and there were the stairs, and you'd kind of go around and up, and you would go up to the second floor, and it was badass because, well, I went to, again, I saw a row of cabinets on the left-hand side, and then when it opened up a little bit more, when you went deeper, there was more stuff. So anyway, but on my way up and where the cabinets were to my left, I stop and I look at my left and I see a game. It's a fighting game, but it's not Mortal Kombat 1. It was Street Fighter 2. Now, Street Fighter 2 would be the first fighting game that I ever play, and every single time I went back to Celebration Station over the coming weeks or however long it was, I would always go and play Street Fighter 2. that game was addictive. I loved the way it sounded. I loved the way it played. I liked the way it looked. It was, I was in love with Street Fighter 2. So later on, I decided to venture out and to go a little bit deeper into the place. And upon doing so, I'm looking around, and and I look to my left and I see another arcade cabinet. And the first thing I notice is, like, from what I remember, from what I can recall, is the screen. And I noticed that on the screen that the characters actually look like real human beings. They don't look cartoonish, kind of like what Street Fighter characters did. And there was also blood, which drew me in. The combination of those two things drew me in. And I look closer, I look at the match that's going on between a few people playing or whatnot, and I was like, wow, this looks really cool. This looks fun. And of course, the game was called Mortal Kombat. And they also had another arcade cabinet, which whenever the arcade was like really busy, it would be occupied. And it was a bigger cabinet. It was the one with like the big screen. And people would gather around and they would watch, you know, during peak hours of the day, which was also cool. But ultimately, Mortal Kombat 1 just looked really cool. And I was like, okay, I basically waited my turn. It was coins up, quarters up, or whatever it was, or tokens up. And I just put I learned the rule of putting a token by the edge of the screen or whatnot would basically save your spot to say, hey, I got next. Like, whoever wins gets to stay, but whoever loses has to give their spot up to me because I got next. So that's basically how it was back in the day. So, and I believe that's where I learned that. And what ended up happening was I played my first match in Mortal Kombat, and even though I was just a kid, I quickly learned and quickly realized that the game did not play as smooth, and it was also slower. It didn't play as smoothly, and it was slower than Street Fighter 2 was. But at the same time, it looked real. It had the blood, and the game got me curious. Now, how did it get me curious? Well, after the end of the two matches or whatnot, the 2 rounds, it'd be like the game would be like, finish him. And I'm like, in my mind, even as an 8-year-old kid, I'm thinking, is there something unique you can do at the end of this round? Or is it just a gimmick, just kind of something that they put in the game to make it sound or seem special, right? Is it just, is it just one of those things? The answer to that question, or those 2 questions, wouldn't be answered until later on. As a matter of fact, they wouldn't be answered on that day, from what I recall. So anyway, I just played and all that stuff, and it was a good time. Mortal Kombat became that game that I would go to that arcade and play time and time again for a while. So anyway, I go back to Celebration Station maybe the following week or something. It would be something that I would do on weekends whenever my dad or mom would say okay to taking me. And the arcade was empty this time. I mean, not the arcade. The cabinet was empty this time. There was nobody on it. I get on and I play a few matches. I feel good. It's like, great. I'm going up the arcade ladder, even though it's getting harder and harder. And then somebody appears next to me and puts coins in, and and I have to play against him. Okay. He picks Johnny Cage. Now, the guy that I picked was Liu Kang, as far as I remember, because I was drawn to only 3 characters of that entire roster. I was drawn to the ninjas, which were Scorpion and Sub-Zero, obviously. And I was also drawn to Liu Kang because he looked like Bruce Lee. Simple as that. It really was that simple. I knew exactly who Bruce Lee was. I thought he was cool. He looked like him. He sounded like him. I'm like, I'm going to play as this guy. And especially since one of his moves really, and plus you had the sound, he sounded like Bruce Lee making all those sounds. And then, of course, the flying kick, of course, reminiscent of Bruce Lee once again. But anyway, this guy picked Johnny Cage, which I don't think I played against anybody other than the AI. I don't think I played against anybody who used Johnny Cage. But anyway, he used Johnny Cage. Cool. I lose. Except this time it would be different. He walked up to me, to my character, did something with the joystick, pressed the button, and the next thing you know, the background went dark, and Johnny Cage uppercutted my head off. And then the game said fatality. And immediately I was like, wow, that was so cool. And then it answered my question, right? It answered my 2 questions of, like, is this a gimmick or is there something you can do? My question was answered. It's like, okay, there is something you could do. But I actually had another question after that. And the question was, well, does everybody have the same fatality, or does everybody have different fatalities? And obviously that wouldn't get answered until later on. But anyway, I asked him, I'm like, how did you do that? And then he showed me on the joystick, forward, 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 and high punch. That's how you do the Johnny Cage fatality in Mortal Kombat 1. And I still remember how to do a lot of fatalities from a lot of the Mortal Kombat games, by the way, guys. Anyway, going back to what I was saying. So the next thing you know, I would pick Johnny Cage as my main from there at that point on, because Johnny Cage ended up being my main because I only knew how to do his fatality. I didn't know how to do anybody's fatality. And on top of that, I actually wouldn't be able to do it the first time. I messed up. So, but then later on, the second time I attempted it, I got it, and it was just such a cool feeling. I was like, yay. So anyway, later on, I somehow found out, I don't know if I got this magazine by accident or whatever the deal was, or maybe I saw the Mortal Kombat game and the characters in the front of it. That could be it. But there's a GamePro magazine that I actually ended up getting. And on the inside of that GamePro magazine, it had screenshots of what the fatalities were and how to do them. So I was like, okay, this is how everybody's fatalities like, and what you have to do them. And some of them were easy, some of them were hard, and some of them I didn't understand. But the thing is, I was like, wow. So upon that, I immediately, like, despite the fact that I knew how to do them and that I saw screenshots of them as well, I immediately said to myself, like, okay, what I need to do is, basically at this point, I said to myself, what I need to do is I need to see this happen in front of my eyes, because it's one thing to see screenshots of something, and it's a whole other thing to literally, like, literally, see it happen, right? So it's kind of like a movie. It's like one thing to see screenshots of a movie. It's another thing to see the movie itself, right? So, okay, cool. Now, I would end up doing more fatalities and all that kind of good stuff. However, with that being said, I would end up getting the home consoles after that game came. Actually, as a matter of fact, I think the home consoles were already out. The console versions were already out, because it was somewhere in the middle of 1992 when I first discovered Mortal Kombat. I didn't discover Mortal Kombat exactly when I came out, despite the fact that the game was out for a matter of months. It was still considered new, but you know, and eventually when getting the versions of the consoles, I learned pretty quickly actually that what ended up happening was it wasn't those versions of the game, although they were pretty decent, those versions of the game were actually not as good as the arcade versions. They just weren't. Those versions of the game were not as good as the arcade versions. And I would always go back to the arcade in order to play the superior version. And I would learn years later that the guys that made the arcade versions, like the developers, Ed Boon, John Tobias, Dan Vogel, and Dan Forden and John Vogel, like all those guys, Dan Forden, sorry, and then John Vogel. The four originals that created Mortal Kombat 1, those were the guys that worked on the arcade. It wasn't, there was a different group that worked on the port for the SNES and the Genesis versions. But anyway, I would end up getting the Genesis version first. And when I played the Genesis version, there was no blood. And I was like, what the hell? I was pissed. I was literally upset. And I'm like, is there any way to do this? But thankfully, I think in the instruction manual or in some other way, it was written somewhere, somehow, that there was a cheat code, and the cheat code was ABACABB. I'm sorry, not a cheat code, a blood code. And there would be a text of the story that would come up. And then during that text, you had to type in ABACABB. And when you did that, the text would turn from white to red, and Scorpion would say, get over here. And that is how you knew that the blood code worked. And I would enable it every single time. Make absolutely no mistake. I would enable it every single time. So I got on there and I played it, and I saw blood, and I was like, okay, this is more like it. It's not like the arcade, but this is more like it. And then I started doing the fatalities on there, and I'm like, okay, this is what happens in the arcade. The fatality is like this in the arcade, as opposed to something else without the blood enabled. Like, for instance, with Sub-Zero, he would just uppercut you really, really, really high off screen if you did the fatality without the blood enabled. But of course, you did the fatality with the blood enabled, he would obviously your head and your spinal cord would get severed. So that's obviously understandable. So so thankfully, I'm glad that ended up being the thing that stayed on. So because of the blood alone, the Genesis version was superior to the SNES version, although the SNES version was superior in other ways. But with that being said, that wouldn't change until MK2. But anyway, I remember as a kid, I was also very much into, I was kind of obsessed with getting the home console version. I'm sorry, the arcade version, but on console. But I didn't know that it was depending on hardware. So what I mean by this is I had absolutely no idea that you had to have like good hardware in order to get the arcade version, or just get the arcade itself. But obviously the arcade was just the cabinet was just too fucking expensive. Would I have loved to get it? If somebody would have said, hey, you can have this, I'd be like, yeah. But obviously that wouldn't be the case. But the thing is, I always thought in my mind, I was like, okay, maybe when the next game comes out, maybe they'll have an arcade version, of this game come out after that. But that just didn't happen. I just didn't know that, because with Street Fighter 2, and this is another reason why why I talked about Street Fighter 2 from the get-go, other than the fact that it's Street Fighter 2 and it's the first fighting game I ever played. It was the fact that there was something else. It was the fact that Street Fighter 2 had all sorts of different versions of it come out, and then the different versions of it that did come out were actually better and looked a lot more like the arcade. Like for instance, there was there was hyper fighting, and then there was the championship edition and stuff like that looked more arcadish, and then you could play as more characters and stuff like that. Like in the original version of Street Fighter 2 for the SNES, you couldn't play as Bison, you couldn't play as Vega, you couldn't play as Sagat, and you couldn't play as Balrog. But in the other editions, you could. And on top of that, there were also some different character animations and stuff like that would be, very accurate to the arcade, that wouldn't exist on the original SNES version. So I thought that that there would be something like that happening with MK1. But that just didn't happen. At least it wouldn't happen until way later on. But again, that was very hardware dependent. So anyway, long story short, though, what happened later on? Well, not really long story short, because this is going to be a story after all. What ended up happening later on was I would discover Mortal Kombat 2 in a very special way. I'll never forget it to this day. I'll never forget how I felt when I saw it and everything, how it looked. So this is how it happened. So one day, my family and I decide, my family are like, hey, you want to go bowling? And I said, sure, let's go bowling. So we went bowling, and we were doing our thing. I was playing for a while. Everybody was playing. It was me, my mom, my dad, and so I need to use the bathroom at some point, and I get up and I go towards the bathroom, and I go use the bathroom. And then I get out of the bathroom and I start walking back towards my lane, but in the corner of my eye, I noticed that the bowling alley has an arcade room, which obviously catches my eye, right? Okay. So I look and I go into the arcade room, and I notice an air hockey table, or an air hockey machine, whatever you want to call it, which I love air hockey, by the way. I don't know if you guys do, but I absolutely adored air hockey growing up as a kid. And then there were about 4 or 5, maybe 6 arcade cabinets and a pinball machine, I think. And that was about it. However, there's one particular cabinet that 2 guys that were taller than me, obviously because I was 9 years old, there were 2 guys that were playing on this arcade cabinet that were taller than me. And on top of that, I was intrigued by this arcade cabinet because of the sound effects. And it didn't sound familiar, but at the same time, it kind of did. So I go closer to get a better look because I can't see the screen, and I'm looking at this stuff. I'm noticing fighters fighting each other, and I'm noticing that it's digitized, so the characters look real. I see blood. I'm like, what? And then one of the fighters wins, and it says finish him, and I'm like, no way. And then guess what? He grabs the guy, puts his hand up, and then takes his soul, and it says Shang Tsung wins. I'm like, what? That's Shang Tsung? He looks so different. I'm like, that's Shang Tsung. And then I look up at the cabinet to look to see if my eyes are not deceiving me, and if my ears are not deceiving me, and the cabinet says MK2. Oh, actually it says Mortal Kombat 2 at the top center, but on the sides and on the bottom it says MK2. And I was just like, no way. And I never forgot what the announcer sounded like, and the fact that I literally witnessed a fatality happen right in front of my eyes on the first viewing, and how much better the game looked and the graphics and stuff like that. I was just like, wow. So go, lo and behold, and I was like, no way. And I ended up staying and watching even more. And I wanted to play, but I don't think I did. I don't think I had any quarters or anything like that. I wanted to play, but I just couldn't. Or maybe I did. I don't know if one of the guys just left the control sticks to me, or the joysticks to me, in order for me to play, because they had to leave or something. I don't remember. I don't remember if that happened or not. I mean, my logic tells me that I would have remembered, but it literally just popped up in my head as I'm doing this commentary, because I've thought about this before and I just didn't remember that part. But it could be a possibility that maybe that did happen. But I was gone from the bowling alley. I mean, I was gone from, my parents for way too long, and they started getting worried. And my dad was looking for me, and he was pissed because I was gone for way too long, and I was in the arcade room. But they found me and all, and thankfully I didn't get in trouble. But yeah, that was the story of how I was originated, how I became introduced to MK2. And I would go back to that bowling alley and would play MK2 again, but it wouldn't happen right away, at least not from my memory. It wouldn't happen right away. And the way it happened was, from what I remember, my second time playing MK2 would be at a mall that was farther away from where I lived. I used to live in the area called Countryside as a kid, and this place was in Tampa. And I think I don't know if it was because of, just friends getting together, whatever it was, but we went to the mall in Tampa, and there was, of course, just like every other mall, there's an arcade place. And lo and behold, there's an arcade on the left-hand side, right next to the entrance, which you can't miss. That was literally like, there were people, that literally a crowd of people surrounding this arcade cabinet. And guess what? I look at it. Yep. And there it is. Lo and behold, it was MK2. And there was one guy that was whooping everybody's butt, and he was good with Sub-Zero. He was whooping everybody's butt. And I eventually got my turn. I didn't care. I got my turn. I played. I lost, of course, but that was my experience. And I was like, man, I was just so amazed of how much better the game played from the first, which I did notice. Even as a kid, you notice these things. And I love the colors, the sound, and the music was like so good and so memorable. The score of the game, I was like, wow. I was just so amazed of how great MK2 was. And yet at the same time, even though it was Mortal Kombat, it was just so different from the first, but better. And I was like, wow. So MK2 was just like on a whole other level. So I did go back to that bowling alley just for that arcade cabinet, right? But eventually my regular place that I would go to play Mortal Kombat 2, and then later on 3 and so on, would be a place called Aladdin's Castle over at the mall that was closer to my place, right? It was a place they used to call Countryside Mall, and right now it's actually called Westfield Shopping Center last time I checked. And but back then it was called Countryside Mall, and Aladdin's Castle would be the place where I would usually go weekly, usually on weekends, obviously, but weekly, and sometimes even twice on weekends. And that they had actually 3 Mortal Kombat cabinets. They had 2, one on the right of the middle of the place, and then one on the left, and then there'd be one shorter arcade cabinet, believe it or not, that was like almost like a miniature version of the arcade cabinet, that was like towards, like a little bit more towards closer to the entrance. And I always played on the regular size ones unless they were occupied, but at the same time I did use the other cabinet as well. It was still Mortal Kombat 2. It was still an arcade accurate version of the game. But I was looking back at it now, I was like, even with the mature rating and everything like that, they made like a smaller, shorter version of the arcade. It's like, I guess a lot of kids were playing it back then, and I guess either their parents gave them permission or they just said, screw it, I'm playing it anyway. But yeah, so MK2 would be the game that I would play like religiously, like every single time I went to the arcade. There were only 2 other games that I played during the time when MK2 was out, before MK3 came out. And those games were Killer Instinct and Primal Rage. But we're going a little bit too far ahead because, well, we got to talk about the home console versions, because this is unique. Because when I got the home console version, and by the way, back in the day, you didn't really know when a game would come out, at least not as easily as you would today. So this is what I did. Well, not what I did, but this is what they did at the arcade place. They had, as soon as the word got out officially that the game would be released on home consoles at some point in time, they had a cardboard type of sign or whatnot, like legit cardboard sign that was custom. It wasn't custom made. It was obviously they would have this at pretty much any arcade that MK2 was in. And what they would do is they would have like coming to your home at some point in time for the, you know, on console, and this would be the date, right? So which was amazing. I would never forget that date from that point out, and that's what I did. And from that point on, it was like I was literally counting down the days until it would come out on console, and I would actually collect magazines, not just to figure out how to do fatalities and stuff like that, but it was also because I wanted to know, I wanted screenshots of what the console versions would look like, because I had access to a Super Nintendo and I had access to a Sega Genesis. So and I remember that the Super Nintendo version I wasn't too happy with MK1, but and I was like, okay, which version do I get? And I looked at the screenshots and I looked at everything that was written and stuff like that. I actually read the articles and stuff like that. And the Super Nintendo version looked better. So I ended up getting Mortal Kombat 2 for the Super Nintendo. And yes, thanks to talking to people and my friends as well, and from what I read in the magazine, blood would eventually be in the game, and you didn't have to implement a code or anything for it. So the SNES version looked superior, so I ended up getting that, and thankfully it was the right decision. And I remember even before the game came out, like I remember one of my friends at recess, he grabbed the magazine that showed how to do fatalities for MK2 and everything like that before the game came out, and either before the game came out, or yeah, it was before the game came out. And I remember seeing like a screenshot of Johnny Cage's torso rip and stuff like that. I was like, wow. And by the way you do Johnny Cage's torso rip in Mortal Kombat 2 is down, down, forward, forward, low punch. Okay, you go right next to the opponent, and then down, down, forward, forward, low punch. And, you know, he would do the torso rip fatality. So, and I remember one of my friends, upon seeing that screenshot, was like, ouch. And then when I saw that screenshot, I'm like, okay, you're not just knocking people's heads off anymore. There's more to it than that. I mean, yes, you are knocking people's heads off in interesting ways, no doubt about it, but there's more to it than that now. There's also the fact that you're also, you're ripping torsos off and you're doing it unique ways, and then you got people blowing up and shit. It's like it's on a whole other level. And then of course I also didn't know that there were other finishers as well. There were friendships and babalities and stuff like that. It was Midway's, now called NetherRealm, but it was the creator's way of saying, hey, don't take this game seriously. You know, this game is not meant to be taken seriously. It is Mortal Kombat, it does what it does, but at the same time we don't want to be known as people to be taken seriously. I mean, but I guess they were taken seriously one way or another because they were making serious money, which was obviously understandable. So later on, what would happen would be as follows. I would play when I got the home version back then, my favorite food was Chinese food. But granted, I still love Chinese food to this day. And I don't know if I would say it's my favorite, but I love it. Like if people say, what kind of food do you like if calories and stuff didn't matter, you know, what kind of food do you enjoy? A lot of it is junk food, but I also like Chinese food. And but Chinese food back in the day was my favorite. So I mean, my favorite go-to would be the pepper steak, which would be with green peppers and onions, the pepper steak meal, and over white rice. Give me a shit ton of that and I'm good, you know. Not that I wouldn't say no to like a lo mein or fried rice or anything like that, but the pepper steak was my go-to. But anyway, I'd get a ton of that. I'd get the game, and then I'd get a ton of that, and I would play the shit out of it. I remember my mom just absolutely spoiled me. You know, I got the game, and then she's like, "You want Chinese food?" And I was like, "Yes." And she gave it to me. It was freaking awesome, man. I ate a shit ton. And of course, I played through the first time with Scorpion. Scorpion was my first that I played the arcade game through. And my mom was like, "Hey, how do you like the game?" I'm like, "Yeah, I beat it already." She's like, "Already?" And, you know, but granted, I didn't beat it with every character. I didn't do everything there was to do and stuff like that. But, you know, you get the point. So ultimately, yeah, it was absolutely badass, and it was so much fun. It was so much fun, and my friends would play it. You know, I would memorize the moves so well. I got to a point to where, you know, Mortal Kombat basically became part of my DNA, and it got to the point to where the movie was getting ready to come out, and I had access to HBO, thankfully. And there was a behind the scenes episode that they did on HBO about the movie. And upon reading the movie about the movie first, I was kind of bummed out that it wasn't rated R, but at the same time, it was still Mortal Kombat. And I saw the behind the scenes footage and all the other stuff and some of the stuff that they did show of the movie, like little bits and clips here and there. And I was very excited. Like, I kid you not, I was very excited. And when I saw Mortal Kombat 2 in theaters, I went with a friend of the family. He was kind of like, he was kind of like my guardian, so to speak. And I went with a friend of the family, and we went to a late screening. I think it was either a 10 or 11 o'clock screening, but I didn't care. It was a weekend. Pfft, who cares, right? So we went and we saw it, and he knew of Mortal Kombat thanks to me, even though he wasn't as familiar as with the characters as me. But word was spreading quick about that because everybody knew about Mortal Kombat because of its I don't know, its popularity, because of the game. Like, this was 1995, right before MK3 were to come out, or right after MK3 were to come out. I keep on I don't remember if it was before 3 days before MK3 came out, or 3 days after MK3 came out. But ultimately, Mortal Kombat, the movie, would come out in 1995, and the game had already made its mark then, right? I mean, Mortal Kombat 1 started everything, and then MK2 really just blew the hell up with everybody. Everybody played MK2. And then the movie came out at the perfect time. So we went to go see it, and it was one of the best movie theater experiences of my life. I was looking forward to this movie more than anything else, and I finally got a chance to see it. And I remember, to this day, I still remember this. And there was a jump scare at the very beginning, because you saw the New Line Cinema logo pop up, right? And then all of a sudden you heard Mortal Kombat. It was the song. It was the techno song, or whatever you want to call it. The classic original Mortal Kombat song, and obviously that's how it starts. And then the music hit, and then I was like, yeah. I was like, no, in my head I was like, yeah. And of course, the epic intro of the dragon logo and fire that would rotate until it would appear, and then the Mortal Kombat font would come out on the screen, said Mortal Kombat in the title. It was just epic, man. It was beautiful. It was one of my favorite movie intros to this very day. There's actually a fan that made a reimagining of it. It doesn't hit quite the same, but it's still good, though. It's amazing what fans do. But the original Mortal Kombat intro is one of my favorite intros in movie history, and it still kind of gives me chills to this day. I've done have I posted it yet? I'm not sure, but I've done a Mortal Kombat live com, like over the movie, like during the movie, where I commentated through the entire movie. And I don't know if I've posted it or not. If I haven't, I need to. But actually, I've done it twice, because the first time it just didn't work out properly. So, but to this day, I mean, Mortal Kombat, in my opinion, I haven't seen the new Mario Brothers movie yet, and I haven't seen any of the Sonic movies, because I heard those two were good as well. But for me personally, I mean, even if those video game movies are superior to Mortal Kombat from video game movie adaptation wise, in terms of live action, Mortal Kombat is obviously still the superior one to me. I know there's a lot of people that love Resident Evil and a few others, but and I totally 100% won't argue with them or anything like that. But for me, it's MK. And Mortal Kombat to this day is still my favorite video game movie adaptation. And that movie, despite the fact that it was PG-13, gave so much an homage to the games and respect to the games, and as well as it actually managed to be violent without being bloody. They managed to cleverly do that, and the special effects back then were great. Some of them have aged better than others, but ultimately the special effects, ultimately those special effects were incredible. Back in the day. And I remember there were plenty of audience reactions to it, like in the middle of that movie. Like, for instance, like when Raiden came out and took out Sub-Zero and Scorpion, like right after Sub-Zero and Scorpion were introduced, like I remember going, holy shit, like those special effects back there were really cool. And I was like, oh my gosh, Raiden just took out those guys easily. And of course, Kerry Tagawa's performance as Shang Tsung in that movie was just, like, he was the one that stood out, man. But I loved Raiden as well. And Johnny Cage, Lyndon Ashby's Johnny Cage was great. Liu Kang was cast very, very well. Kano was cast very, very well. Sonya was, I mean, I like the actress. I thought she was always gorgeous, but obviously she had a very limited time to prepare for the film, because she wasn't the one that was originally cast, but she did the best she could. So, but yeah, I mean, the whole movie as a whole, and I love the fact that they combined Mortal Kombat 1 and Mortal Kombat 2 elements into the movie, because Kitana was in there, and I'm like, why is Kitana here? she's a Mortal Kombat 2 character, but I sure as hell didn't. I didn't have anything against that, and they made her fit in very well. And of course, Talisa Soto as Katana. I mean, she's just absolute gorgeous woman. That woman in her prime was something else, man. Um, let's see what else. Goro looked pretty good, despite the fact that there were a lot of difficulties and stuff. But yeah, I mean, and Reptile looked kind of weird, but the way he was introduced when he turned into his ninja form was epic. I remember seeing on YouTube very recently that they had a reaction video of a theater reaction of back in my day, of the crowd going nuts. My crowd didn't go that nuts. As a matter of fact, my crowd hardly went nuts at all, but I did notice a few reactions here and there. Like when Scorpion's spear came out of the palm of his hand for the first time, I remember people were going like, ugh, you know, things like that. Or, you know, just reactions to the special effects more than anything. So, and of course, whenever there would be something funny, there, you know, like with Raiden, of course, you know, he'd be like laughing and be like, whoops, sorry. You know, little things like that. But, or something maybe Johnny Cage would say. But ultimately, at the end of the day, Mortal Kombat of 1995 was just an excellent movie. And then, after seeing that movie twice in theaters, I went back to Aladdin's Castle. And upon going back to Aladdin's Castle, things were different this time. Because this time, there was an unusually large crowd in front of one arcade cabinet specifically. Not two arcade cabinets, they only had one. One arcade cabinet, and I couldn't tell what this game was, at least not right away. So I was, how old was I? Like 10 years old? I was 10 years old. I wasn't 11 yet. And basically, like, I couldn't tell what the fuss was about with this arcade cabinet, right? So I come closer and I can't see anything because there's too much of a crowd. And then I look up and I see that there is a little arcade. There's like a second screen on top of that one that they somehow managed to, I guess, duplicate from what the original arcade cabinet screen was on, so that way people would watch. And upon looking up, despite the fact that, again, just like Mortal Kombat 2 was different from Mortal Kombat 1, Mortal Kombat 3 would be different from Mortal Kombat 2. And I looked at it and I'm like, this is Mortal Kombat 3. And then I look at the cabinet. I take a better look at the cabinet itself to see, you know, what the game is actually called. And yep, there it is. It was MK3 and it said MK3. And then the logo was on the bottom part of the 3. I thought that was cool. And I was like, wow, here we go. This is it. I got so excited. And it actually cost 3 tokens to play instead of 2. Usually games cost 2 tokens to play, but this one costs 3. So I was like, I didn't care. I didn't care. I was like, 3 tokens? Wow. I was like, but I didn't care. But ultimately, I was in love. Despite the changes, despite the fact that Scorpion was not in the game, I like the fact that, like, even the setting was different. Like, it was taking place on a city, like in modern times. And there were new characters, like there were returning ones that I would know about. I thought it was cool that Sub-Zero was unmasked. I think a lot of people like might have been bummed out by that, but for me personally, and I quickly also realized that Cabal was instantly a fan favorite. Like, I remember like some of the best players would play as Cabal, and upon watching Cabal's gameplay, I was like, yeah, no wonder they like this guy. He can dash extremely fast. He's got projectiles. He's got a unique look to him. If you see his fatality, you could definitely tell that he's definitely special. And from a gameplay perspective, it was just perfect. And then they had a female Goro in the form of Shiva. They had Shao Kahn's queen. You know, Cyber Smoke was a hidden character, but he could turn into regular Smoke. At least I don't think he can turn into regular Smoke until Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3. But Kung Lao was back. Liu Kang was back. Kano actually looked good this time. Sonya was in the game, so Kano and Sonya made a return. Let's see. Sub-Zero was obviously in the game. And of course, like, there was this really cool effect to where if you uppercut somebody, they could go through the uppercut and stuff like that. I remember seeing a stage fatality of the subway level of the subway stage, and it's like I saw somebody do a stage fatality and they got uppercutted through, and then a train came over and ran them over. I was like, wow. I was like, holy crap. So I, for one, loved the way the game looked. I loved it. And I also noticed that there were dial-up combos. There were also two cybernetic there were two robots, cybernetic organisms or whatnot, and Cyrax and Sector. I actually thought Cyrax was Scorpion under there because he was yellow. So I was like, okay, that's got to be Scorpion. There's, you know, and they kind of looked like Predator as well. They kind of had a Predator look to them. So I was like, you know, it's just how they looked back then, you know? So I was like, it reminds me of Predator. I'm like, oh, that's so cool. So you got a red one, you got a yellow one. So I'm like, huh, these are cyber ninjas. So I'm like, that's cool. So yeah, and then you had, I believe Kitana was in the game. Maybe, I'm not sure. I'm trying to remember. Shang Tsung looked really cool. I liked his long hair. He looked really cool with his long hair and stuff. I'm like, ooh, let's see if they made him more powerful and stuff. So Shang Tsung was pretty much doing the same stuff he was always doing, but except just like everybody else, they had dial-up combos. The run button was introduced. They added in an extra button, the run button, which I didn't use. I actually didn't use the run button because I just, you know, stuck with it. But a lot of good players did. The only time I ever touched the run button usually would be for fatalities because they did require that. So, and I was always looking forward to what the new fatalities would be. I'm like, okay, let's see what other crazy stuff, you know, the creators would come up with this time. So, and of course, the sound sounded really good. The music sounded really good. And I was just like, wow, I was absolutely just hyped. I just couldn't believe it. I was like, wow. It was MK3, and it was right after, or it was just at the time when MK came out in the theaters. But I would still play Mortal Kombat 2 at home, and sometimes even in the arcade, because it reminded me of the Mortal Kombat 1 movie, you know, and the Mortal Kombat 1 movie kind of inspired me to play even more MK2, as if I needed more inspiration as far as that goes. So ultimately, with Mortal Kombat 3, the main thing that I realized early on, because one of my first games, one of the first times I ever played, you know, this one dude was using Liu Kang and he whooped my butt, and I was like, okay, what I need to do is, like, I need to start learning these combos, right? I need to start learning these combos, or else I'm just not going to survive. I remember Cyrax was one of the first ones that I learned, one of the first characters of combos that I learned. Sector I hardly used at all, but as soon as I saw that you could do some crazy shit with them, I used them a few times, but just not much. But just like always, you would find out how to do characters' combos and moves through magazines. And that's how that would end up being. So again, the adventure continues, right? You look for magazines that, you know, show MK3. And then the cool thing was, I was amazed because the sub boss, basically, Motaro, was like, okay, I'm like, okay, they're going to have another four-armed monster, right? It's either going to be Goro or Kentaro or somebody new, but nope, it's a four-legged monster, and it's Motaro. And I'm like, man, that's genius. It's like, okay, we did 4 arms twice. It's like, okay, let's do 4 legs now. So they got Motaro, and he was very intimidating as well. I was like, holy crap. And then Shao Kahn obviously would be the main bad guy again, but except this time he was even more intimidating because he was huge. Like in Mortal Kombat 2, he was pretty big, but in Mortal Kombat 3, he was huge, and he was even cheaper. Like if you thought Shao Kahn was cheap in MK2, he's cheaper in MK3, man. He is cheap as hell and fast too, and his moves do so much damage. And then he's got that Warhammer that you don't want to get hit by. Yeah, and then of course he would say, you know, a few more things. You know, he would say similar things just like he did in MK2, but this time it would be it'd be even worse. So and then obviously the stage fatalities would make a return, which was great. You always wondered, you know, which stage had the stage fatality and what would be below, you know, because in MK1 you had spikes, and MK, like in the pit, in the original pit, you had spikes. In the pit 2, it was basically just nothing but like rocks. And then the pit 3, it's like, what would be there? You'd basically have these spikes that would rotate and be circular or whatnot. It was like, man, what the hell? So it's like the developers come up with all sorts of shit. So yeah, there was a pit 1, pit 2, and pit 3. And you were just wondering, it's like, what are they going to come up with this time? How many hazards are going to be this time? What changes are there going to be to the gameplay? And it was very apparent. They started adding in dial-up combos, and then the speed of the game was a little bit faster because of that, and because of the run button. But other than that, but at the same time, the games looked really good. The colors were very vibrant, and at the same time, the actors were digitized. So like pretty much everything looked real. And like when you saw like some of the things were not like there was what's it called, like these guys wore suits. Like the people that played Cyrax and Sector, to my knowledge, those guys wore suits, and they actually got in the suits. And you know, and at the end of the game, if you beat the game, it would say, you know, such and such played by this person, you know. So and I think there were either 8 or 12 people that developed Mortal Kombat 3. So the development team grew. I don't know if it was still 4 people that developed MK2. I kind of have to go back and see, but I'm pretty sure Mortal Kombat 1, I know that Mortal Kombat 1 had 4. I'm going to assume Mortal Kombat 2 had like, let's say 4 to 7, and then MK3 either had 7 or 12 or something like that. But yeah, it's just a really cool group of guys that just developed this shit, and it was really badass, man. And the new characters were good. Some of them were more popular than others, but I remember just Cabal being an absolute favorite. And back then, as a kid, I thought it was cool that Sub-Zero was unmasked. You know, I thought it was still cool. Um, but yeah, but the characters were pretty damn cool. Kung Lao was even better this time. So, and the fact that you had animalities, which was a new finisher, that was cool too. It's like, oh wow. So when you saw those pop up, it's like, whoa. You know, and of course there were friendships and babalities like usual. So they kept on giving us more content. And then there's the versus screen whenever you'd fight somebody else that you would basically, you would see them, you would see the two characters side to side, you know, in the versus screen, which is pretty badass. But there would be like these codes that you could enter. Like there's these, it's almost like a Rubik's Cube of type of codes that you can enter on the bottom with like a million different combinations. And if you entered a certain type of combination correctly, and there were a ton of them, you could basically do things like maybe one person would be handicapped, or another person would be or maybe you do some things like dark combat or something like that, or things like that that make subtle changes to the gameplay and stuff. Or sometimes you would actually unlock somebody, but it took 2 players in order to do that. But yeah, ultimately players would just mash buttons until they figure out what it was. So I like the fact that the developers took the time to do that. But ultimately, yeah, you could, there were, I think, well, I know Smoke was a hidden character, but you had to unlock him by that sort of means or whatnot. But yeah, there was, man, it was great. And then Jade was, well, no, that was Ultimate MK3, but you guys get the point. MK, oh no, Jade was playable in Mortal Kombat 3, was she not? So in the original vanilla MK3, and then Ultimate MK3 would come out 6 months later. But wait, I forgot something. I forgot about telling you the story about the home console version. So I ended up getting MK3 on the SNES again for the same reason that I got MK2, because again, judging by what I saw in the magazine clips and stuff like that, MK3 just looked better on the Super Nintendo than what it did on the Sega Genesis, and lo and behold, I was right yet again. So and it was so much fun to play, and the way it happened was similar but yet different. So I guess I told my mom about the game, and the thing is, I think she had to be, I don't know if she had to do something earlier on or whatnot, but it was the weekend and I would sleep in. I would have gotten up to go and get Mortal Kombat, but she took it upon herself. And this is how sweet my mom was, you know, as a child and stuff like that. And like, and God bless her, man. It was, I think it came out on a weekend, or if it was on a day, on the day that she got it. I don't think I got it on the day of the game's release, but on the day that I got it, it must have been a weekend, because I got up, upon waking up, she had come home from wherever it was that she was going, and not only did she get the game for me, but she also got me McDonald's breakfast. And I never got up early for McDonald's breakfast, but she got it for me, because usually I'd be sleeping in a lot longer. But she brought me McDonald's breakfast, and I was like, oh my gosh, it was like the best. But I was so excited about the game, about getting it finally, that I actually didn't eat much of my McDonald's breakfast, which, looking back at it now, I was like, how in the world did you not eat that? But yeah, it was, oh man, that's how excited I was. I was so excited that I couldn't eat my McDonald's breakfast. I just wanted to play. And I ended up playing, and I don't know who I picked first. I think it might have been Cyrax, and I knew how to do his fatality, his helicopter fatality, and I did that. That was one of the first fatalities I did, if not the first one. And it looked really good. Like, I was like, wow, this actually looks really good and comparable to the arcade. Even though I noticed the differences, I was like, it's still good. So what did I do later that day? I called some of my friends up, and I said, hey, guess what? They're like, what? I got MK3. And they're like, no way, you got to come over. And my mom, again, bless her soul, she actually drove me over there, and I played MK3, and I believe I even spent the night. And check this out, my friends had access to a magazine, a specific magazine, that it wasn't the entire strategy guide, but they had a specific magazine that literally had the moves, the finishers, and combos for every single character. So we would play, there were 3 brothers, so there were 4 of us in the room just playing all day, right? So we played MK3 3, like we played against each other. We also played against the AI. You know, the way we do that was we would take turns, but we eventually played against ourselves, and then we also did like those button combos for the Rubik's cube thing during the versus screen. Um, Whenever we played against each other with that as well. So we played all freaking night until we couldn't stay up anymore, and eventually, and then we got up in the morning. We did the same thing, and then I ended up going home. So, but it was hell of a lot of fun. I remember we did the same thing with Killer Instinct when I got that game, but eventually with MK3, that was the story of that as far as the console versions go. And I would play that game so much, and it became my thing. And I remember moving, like we moved from one apartment complex to the other during that time, and obviously MK3 would be the game that I would consistently play over and over again. I would find out like some cheat codes and stuff like that, which I would implement. I would figure out how to play as Smoke, and I don't remember what the code was to play as Smoke, but I remember that like if you wanted to play as Smoke, Cyber Smoke, obviously for MK3. Like if you did the code right during a specific title portion of the screen, you had to hold down a certain amount of buttons or something like that. Cyber Smoke would literally walk out right in front of the MK3 logo, and that would be a signal that it worked. So I thought that was cool. But MK3 was just so much fun, and there was so much to do, memorize. You know, when it comes to button combos and shit like that, finishers and everything like that. Like the game was just so full of content. It was great. You couldn't help but play it with your friends. It was one of the most funnest games to play with your friends whenever they would come over, whenever you would go over to their house, and it would be a game that would be religiously played by myself and my friends. And trust me when I tell you, I had a lot of sleepovers, and a lot of times we spent playing Mortal Kombat. So it was just so much fun, man, so much fun. But anyway, so upon playing Mortal Kombat 3, one of my friends that came over one day told me, "Dude, I saw this in the arcade. It was called Mortal Kombat 3 Ultimate. Obviously, it's called Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, but back then that's what we called it, Mortal Kombat 3 Ultimate." And I'm like, "No, you're not. You're lying. Mortal Kombat 3 is Mortal Kombat 3. They're not going to release Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3. They'd release Mortal Kombat 4 if that makes sense." But we ended up going to Aladdin's Castle, and lo and behold, there it was, Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, with even more characters, more levels, and Scorpion was back. And I was like, oh man. And then I quickly realized, I'm like, man, I gotta have this game. I gotta have this game. But it wasn't out yet. I knew that certain platforms like the Saturn or whatnot would get it. The SNES version would not come out for a while. But and it would also have Rain and Noob Saibot unlocked for the SNES version, and I didn't have that version, so I ended up getting the arcade version for the Saturn much later on. But ultimately, Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, I would just play at arcades, and that became the thing. However, during that time, though, Ultimate MK3 came out 6 months or so, give or take, after MK3. So during that time, I ended up. That I do. There was, for those of you guys that have watched my retrospective video about Killer Instinct, during that time, Killer Instinct, it was around 1995 when Killer Instinct came out, and it was that time when Killer Instinct came out, and I also played a lot of Killer Instinct, and during that time, I ended up getting obviously I got the SNES version of it, but sometime later on, I ended up getting a Saturn. I was one of the few people that actually got a Saturn, and upon getting the Saturn, one of the first games that I would get was Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, and finally, after so many years of wanting an arcade version of any form of Mortal Kombat at my home, Mortal Kombat 3 would be the first arcade version that I would get. And I also mentioned previously in this video that my first that I also played Primal Rage, and I also got Primal Rage for the Sega Saturn, which was again an arcade accurate version of that game, because I would realize it from the violence and the gore and the graphics, and of course I would also realize it from the music as well. So putting all those things together, I ended up finally getting it for the Saturn, and man was I happy. I was happy. I was having a good time. It was great. So Ultimate MK3 would be the last time when I actually played, like, you know, that version, and when my Mortal Kombat streak would would happen. So now, this is around the time when things were not very financially good, and things would change within the household of the family. Decisions would be made and things would be going south. So these were the consoles that I had. I had a regular Nintendo, I had a Super Nintendo, I had a Sega Genesis, I had a Sega CD, I had a 32X, I had a Sega Saturn, and I had obviously games for all those, right? I had all those consoles and a bunch of games for each of them. And we had to sell all of that. And as a matter of fact, if I remember correctly, we sold it for cheap, especially since a lot of this stuff was old back then. But still, there was some stuff that was new. But believe it or not, I think it was only like a few $100s to where my parents sold all that stuff to. And I was like, what? Looking back at it now, I was like, dude, that was worth so much more even back then. We could have gotten at least $1,000 out of all that. And obviously, with today, it would be probably worth even more. But anyway, so things changed. And I wouldn't play video games like the way I had been for a long time. Ended up moving in with my aunt and uncle. And every once in a while, there would be like, and this was like far from home. Let's put it that way. It was far from home. And life was different. And there was like a bar that had like these very old school arcades and stuff like that. And it sure wasn't anything close to an arcade that I would go as frequently as I could, but the experience would be very different. And, there was no money, so it wouldn't happen as very often. And I'd just play different kinds of games, or maybe an arcade soccer game, but nothing anywhere near what I used to play. Didn't have anything to play at the house. There was no consoles or anything like that. I would just kind of play sports. Life changed dramatically. There was no more McDonald's. There was no more sleepovers and stuff like that. Life was different. Everything had completely been taken away. Life circumstances. That's how life is, and that's how it would be for about 2 years, the better part of 2 years. And fast forward to 1998, we finally end up getting our nice little apartment again. We ended up getting an apartment, which was nice. And without having a home of my own for 2 years, I just, it was nice just sleeping on the floor. And I'm like, hey, this is mine. This is our place, blah, blah, blah. And then the furniture would come in for about 2 days later. But yeah, so, and I didn't have any consoles or anything. The people that I was, there was one point in time where I was staying, I went from my aunt's house and stuff like that. And when we went through the transition to getting into our new apartment, after that, I ended up staying with a few friends of my dad's and his family. And they had an N64. He and his kids had an N64. I would play on it every once in a while whenever they'd let me. And basically after that, after about a few months of that, it would be, I would just have my own place, but I didn't have anything to play. I had no console. I didn't have anything. Didn't even have my own TV or anything. So it was just whatever, right? So peer pressure ended up, I wanted an N64, but peer pressure ended up getting me a PlayStation. Now, do I regret that? No, I do not. But I ended up getting a PlayStation, and Mortal Kombat 4 was actually not the first game that I got. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't have any games. I'd have a demo. There would be a demo disc, and then my parents went to the store and ended up getting a game for me on my birthday, and it was Duke Nukem Time to Kill, which was also my first Duke Nukem game, and my introduction to Duke Nukem. And on top of that, later on, I would want to get Mortal Kombat 4. And this was the first time that Mortal Kombat went into 3D, and it was also obviously on PlayStation, so it would be pretty arcade accurate from what I know. And I didn't know this back in the day, but Mortal Kombat 4 would be the last arcade port that they would ever make. And I actually never played the arcade port. And if I did, it was actually way after I got the what's it called? The home port version, the PlayStation version, right? Now, I am going to take a very small water break for a few seconds. Cheers to your health. I've been talking all this time without sipping any water. Hold on. So eventually, and And this is a very funny, well, not a funny story, but a unique story again. And it's very funny how in Mortal Kombat, there's always a unique story that led me to Mortal Kombat. Like I was always able to play the game, and the way it happened would be interesting. So anyway, so with MK4, on the day that my mom and I went to get MK4, Dad had the car, but Mom, and I had to take the bus. So okay, we take the bus, but on our way back home, after going to the store and getting a few other things and getting the game, we took a wrong bus, and it delayed our trip home by about at least 2 hours or so. So, but thanks to the box art and the disc and then the instruction manual that I opened and looked at, I was not bothered one bit, because I would constantly look at it. I would read it. I would look at the screenshots in the back of the box cover art and stuff like that. And I'd be like, yeah, I got Mortal Kombat 4. When I get home, I'm going to play it. It was just like the excitement and the looking at the box cover art and everything like that just, had me very, very excited. So anyway, we finally make it home, and I, just put the disc in and I play and all that good stuff. I mean, I didn't care that we were on the bus for so long. It was like, hey, it's nice to be home. And I just played the shit out of MK4. And I realized that although it was an MK, and it also felt very different. It was the first Mortal Kombat to me that felt very different, because, well, I also ended up playing Mortal Kombat Trilogy, even though I never owned it, but I did rent it, back in the day. And I know I kind of skipped over Mortal Kombat Trilogy, but Mortal Kombat Trilogy was basically Mortal Kombat 3 with even more characters than Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, but the gameplay engine was Mortal Kombat 3, and it was basically all the characters from all the games, and a few throwbacks and stages and stuff like that. I mean, Mortal Kombat Trilogy was just MK 1, 2, and 3 combined in its own unique way, but with the main engine being Mortal Kombat 3, and you can also play as the bosses and stuff like that, and that's what Mortal Kombat Trilogy was to me. And the only way I would play it was through renting it from Blockbuster, but it would be for the PlayStation. But back then I didn't have the PlayStation. I didn't get a PlayStation until later on, when I just discussed. So anyway, fast forward to back to track here. So with MK4 just sounded different. It looked different. There was a whole bunch of different characters, but the cutscenes were very unique. The cutscenes were very unique with the endings, so I really enjoyed that. And just a whole bunch of new characters and a different setting, really. So it was very new to me, and everything just looked and sounded so different. But at the same time, it was Mortal Kombat, and of course, it played a little different too, because there was weapons that you could use. Like there was weapon like stuff you could, you could even pick up a few stuff on the stage or whatnot and just throw it at your opponent. So you could whip out a weapon, which every character had, and then you could, you could throw stuff at your opponent. And then there was, what was it? And then the fatalities looked, it was just, again, a whole different thing. But yeah, it was very interesting to say the least. And of course, you could play as the final boss, Shinnok, and Goro was the sub-final boss, which was great. And I thought Goro had been killed, but I'm glad they brought him back. But with that being said, there was just a lot of stuff that was, I don't know, there was just something missing. There was just a lot of things missing, but it was Mortal Kombat 4. And the fact that I wanted to see every single character's ending in those cutscenes made me play the game with every single character. So, and of course, Riko's ending, or Raiko's ending, I was always intrigued by. I'm like, has Shao Kahn been here the whole time and we didn't know it? Although that wasn't the case, and Raiko is a different character than Shao Kahn. It made me think. I was like, what is that? So it was really cool to see. I was like, oh my gosh, it's Shao Kahn because of the helmet and all that. So anyway, but yeah, I thought the endings were really cool. I thought it was interesting that I thought it was interesting how Kitana offered Liu Kang, and Kitana wasn't in the game, but she was in Liu Kang's ending, from what I remember, I think. And yeah, and she basically offered Liu Kang a chance to rule along with her and Edenia, and he declined respectfully. But yeah, I mean, I thought it was really cool though. The final boss with Shinnok was kind of like, I mean, you understood the power because he was an elder god and stuff like that, but it was just underwhelming because usually the last boss is just, it doesn't feel like any other character, but he did. So it was like, it is what it is. But I thought Quan Chi was a really good character. It was the first game with Quan Chi in there. Shinnok's first introduction with it was within the game. And then there were a couple of characters that you just didn't really remember all that much, like Jarek, for instance. He was supposed to be like another Kano, so to speak, but not Kano. But yeah, there was Fujin. Fujin was a standout for me. You didn't just have Raiden this time, but you had Fujin. Um, but MK4, it was like really cool with the 3D. A lot of people really took to it and they really liked it. But as much as I liked it, at the same time, it was like cool and all, but it was just like meh. And this would also be John Tobias's last Mortal Kombat that he worked on. He's the co-creator along with Ed Boon. And John Tobias's last Mortal Kombat would be MK4. And then later on, what else? It would also be the last arcade port that they would make for the game. So for Mortal Kombat 5, also known as Deadly Alliance and beyond, it would be Ed Boon and company making it. I don't know if they also made it for the PlayStation and the N64. I'm not sure if they did all three. I don't remember. But with that being said, Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance, also known as Mortal Kombat 5, would have its own unique story. Yet again, in my story. So I worked a lot. I worked actually the entire summer with hardly any days off after my sophomore year in high school. And I really just loved making money and keeping the majority of it and all that kind of stuff. So I was helping the house out, because we were always kind of a poor family growing up. So I always helped the family out. But I certainly made enough money to have leftovers and stuff. So what I did was I went to the mall, and of course I got a lot of video game stuff and everything. But and of course you had to get some clothes as well. But I also ended up getting during that time, I ended up getting a Dreamcast, which I always wanted. And because I was a big fan of Sonic and everything like that. And I also ended up getting a GameCube. So I ended up getting a GameCube. Great. And I got a few games for it and everything. Absolutely loved it. Now, after I start school, obviously there was the internet at that time as well. So I had the internet and I would look up stuff. Like I would look up anything I was interested in. And the next Mortal Kombat would be one of those things. And there was a Mortal Kombat 5 with Scorpion's face on it. And it was something that was in development, maybe a few screenshots here and there, and then that was it. It was really cool. I kept on looking at it on a daily basis to see if it would get updated. So anyway, and of course there was the usual magazine stuff that you would find, because the internet was still relatively new and it was just, starting to take off back then. And anyway, so Mortal Kombat, the school year had started, and one of my best friends just happened to have gym class with me. And Mortal Kombat 5 had come out, and he told me that he got the game. And guess what? He's got a GameCube as well. And I was banned from working because once the school year had started of junior year, my grades were dropping, so my parents didn't allow me to work during the school year. I could only work during the summer. So I had no money except my lunch money. So my best friend says, look, how about this? I'll get the game for you. I'm like, what? I'm like, I have nothing to pay you. He's like, listen, just give me $5 a day for the next 2 weeks, and you can just pay me off that way. He's like, I'll get it to you. I'll bring it to you tomorrow when we have class again, and wham bam. And the next thing you know, then the very next day, he gives me the game, and I give him $5, and I would do this for 2 weeks, and I would just eat less during lunchtime. So, and I didn't care because I had Mortal Kombat. And that very day, man, let me tell you, when I went home that very day, I was excited as hell to play the game because I had seen screenshots of it from the internet, as well as the as well as the magazine, and I couldn't wait to get my hands on it. So, and upon seeing it and upon playing it, I was just absolutely amazed. It did feel more Mortal Kombat-ish to me than Mortal Kombat 4 did. And it actually had some content. It had a lot of content with Conquest mode and And it was actually the first full-on 3D gameplay Mortal Kombat, and I loved the way the characters looked. My favorite character, Scorpion, looked really good. I really like his default costume in Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance. I also liked his alternate costume, which was basically him with the flaming skull, which is cool, because the only other time when you would see him with a flaming skull was whenever he would do the fatality. Um, but now it was like a default and stuff like that. It's like, okay, that's really cool. So anyway, going back to what I was saying about this game is that it got me addicted again. And I played until I unlocked all 676 coffins in the crypt. Now, for those of you guys that don't know, the crypt is basically, how do I put this? The crypt is basically there's 676, a room full of 676 coffins, and you have to have a certain amount of coins to unlock every single one of them. For each one is cost a certain amount of coins that you would get through gameplay. And the way you would do this is you would obviously play the game numerous times in the arcade ladder, which I would do with every single character because I wanted to see every single character's ending, and plus it gave me a reason. And on top of that, there was also the fact that you would also have to do conquest mode. And conquest mode was a mode which was a trainer, which got you to be able to like master a character's moves and combos and stuff like that for every character. And I would actually beat conquest mode with every single character, and that's what conquest mode was in Deadly Alliance. This conquest mode that you're seeing here in Deception is there is a little bit of that in there, but it's also an RPG game as well. There's obviously the fighting element like you're seeing here, but it's mainly an action RPG game where you control Shujinko, but they retain some of the training elements in there. But anyway, going back to what I was saying, I wanted to see every character's ending, which I did. Oh, and by the way, the cutscene in the beginning was really impressive, and it really just caught up on everything. Like Shang Tsung and Quan Chi were teamed up, and then they ended up killing Shao Kahn, and then they ended up ambushing and killing Liu Kang. I was like, wow, the developers are really going ballsy. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, they killed Liu Kang. So, yeah. And I was like, wow, this is real. And then Raiden is a playable character again because he relinquished his position as an elder god in order to help them. Johnny Cage would come back and all that. So anyway, it was just so freaking cool, man. You saw a lot of returning characters, which was great. And then you saw a lot of characters that were new, but the new characters were really good. And even the returning ones even kind of looked unique, even though you wouldn't necessarily agree with their looks 100%, but it is what it is. And everything just looked really cool. And the thing is, this was actually the first time where at Boon and Company, like they had over 50 people work on this game. And one of the pieces of content that you would find in one of the crypts was the behind the scenes making of this game. It was a video and it was behind the scenes and it was badass to say the least, right? So anyway, I thought the behind the scenes making of it was great, but ultimately the game, as good as it was, because it was, there were a few things that just fell short. Like for instance, some characters didn't have some of their moves that they would have in other games because the developers didn't have time to implement them and put them in there, and there would only be one fatality per character, and some of the fatalities were just really bad, kind of like Quan Chi, for instance. And Ed Boon to this day says he can't believe they shipped the game with that. I agree, respectfully. And there was just a lot of things missing that was in the Mortal Kombat thing. You know, there were some stage hazards, but there were no stage fatalities, right? So it was kind of like a nerfed version of a stage fatality or whatnot. But everything you would need in a Mortal Kombat game was there, but ultimately there was still a shit ton of things missing. There weren't as many secrets and everything like that. Very straightforward. So there was a piece of that Mortal Kombat DNA and content that was missing. But for what we got, it was great. I mean, it was great. There was Test Your Might was brought back. Test Your Sight was there. And again, you would beat the game with every character. There was conquest mode with every character, and then there was a crypt to unlock stuff. So now, when I played that game, it was one of the first games that I legitimately wanted to complete. Like I started becoming a completionist with that aspect because I wanted to unlock every single crypt coffin. And I played the game numerous times and beat the game extra times and went through conquest mode with every single character, including the characters that I didn't want to play as, in order to do that, right? I wanted to do everything you could in that game because it was Mortal Kombat. It was fun. It was great. And yeah, I mean, simple as that. So I did that and I enjoyed every second of it. And Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance, and plus there was no online back then either, so you couldn't play online against other people. That wouldn't happen until the next game, Mortal Kombat Deception, which is the one you're looking at now. But Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance really kind of shook things up with not just from a gameplay standpoint, but also from a story standpoint. I wasn't expecting for them to. I wasn't expecting for Luke. I mean, Quan Chi and Shang Tsung killed Shao Kahn, and then they killed, what's his face, Liu Kang. So now, with the next game, Mortal Kombat Deception, I was out of high school, and that game came out in September, if I'm not mistaken. So anyway, or around that time. But anyway, it's 2004. I was out of high school, and it was one of my most anticipated games. Halo 2 was that other game, but Mortal Kombat Deception was one of my most anticipated games because I had looked on the internet about it and I saw how much conquest there was going to be in the game, and I had seen reviews on it before the game came out because the reviews would come out roughly 24 hours, give or take, before the game came out. And back then, I wasn't watching stuff on YouTube, so I would look at GameStop back then for that. So I saw the review and I saw nothing but good stuff, and I just couldn't wait. So I ended up, this was on a Monday, and I saw my friends as usual. Every Monday we would get together and I would see my friends, and we would hang out and play games all day. And I got taken to, Babbage's or GameStop or whatever it is, and I ended up getting the game. And I come home with the game, and I had eaten as well, which was a lot of junk food. But I didn't sleep very much the night before because I was just overall excited about the game and getting it. And anyway, so I play the game. I get the game, I play it, and I take a nap for a little while. But my best friend, when he takes the sticks, he ends up falling in love with Conquest Mode. And Conquest Mode is what you're seeing here. It's like it's an RPG set in the universe, and there's a multitude of different realms. There's like 6 different realms and stuff like that. You go around, you talk to NPCs, you do side missions, you collect collectibles, you get a lot of the stuff that you can't get in the game otherwise, like alternate characters and stuff like that. I mean, alternate costumes and stuff like that, and a few other things. And there's a story that progresses as well, right? That follows right after the cutscene, because the opening cutscene was amazing. We were in shock that the Deadly Alliance succeeded and that the good guys had lost. Like, when we heard Shujinko say Raiden's Earthrealm forces had failed to stop the Deadly Alliance from fully resurrecting the mummified army of the Dragon King, my best friend and I that looked at each other like, what? And it's like, and then it was Raiden against Quan Chi and Shang Tsung by themselves. And the production of the cutscene was great too, as well. It was better than the cutscenes that you saw in Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance. Like, this cutscene blows Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance cutscene like right out of the water. Like, it was like so amazing. It was like Raiden taking on Quan Chi and Shang Tsung all by himself. And at first it seemed like he would win, but they overpowered him at the end. And then the Dragon King shows up. It's like we get a boss that isn't Shao Kahn, that's supposedly deadlier than Shao Kahn, who actually ruled Outworld before Shao Kahn did. And Shao Kahn was actually an advisor and waited, basically pulled the Thanos and waited until Dragon King got weak or something like that, and then took him out or whatever. But man, this was awesome. So but he fell in love with Conquest Mode, and I was half asleep, half awake, and he was playing Conquest Mode and he couldn't put it down. And I was like, really? So, but he loved that. And of course, we just love watching the gameplay because, Mortal Kombat with the fatalities and that other stuff. But Mortal Kombat Deception was everything that Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance was, but better. The graphics were better. The gameplay was better, especially when it came to the jumps, because when it came to the jumps in Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance, the jumps felt like it was really hard to get a jump kick off. So with this game, they felt a lot more like the 2D games. The combos felt better. The gameplay was fluid and a little bit faster. Elements were brought back that were in previous Mortal Kombat games, such as the stage fatalities were there. 2 fatalities per character were there, and they were awesome this time. And back then, they were known as being some of the best in the series. And then after that, it was, what was it? They introduced a harakiri, which was like a self fatality, to where it's something that hasn't been brought in any Mortal Kombat game since, and they really, like, people have been requesting it along with conquest mode. So it's like, why hasn't it been brought back since, this feature? But anyway, and then you had chess combat, and then you had puzzle combat. Chess combat was like, you know, Puzzle Fighter 2 or whatever, but with a Mortal Kombat twist, you know, with the cute Mortal Kombat characters down below and stuff like that. And then you had chess combat, which was basically inspired off of another game called Archon, which was basically like chess mixed with Mortal Kombat. So that was pretty cool. The amount of the content in the game was insane. Now you're looking at this conquest mode, and this is just like part 1 of gameplay that you're seeing here. And this is over 4 hours worth of footage. I doubt that this commentary is going to be 4 hours plus, but the conquest mode would take, like, you know, I think double digits in hours in order to get through, if not close to that. So, but the thing is, like, there was just so much to do and so many characters that you run into. I mean, look at this. This is Ermac you're talking to, and you're doing side missions and stuff. Like any Mortal Kombat character in this game that wasn't part of the roster, chances are they'd be found in the conquest mode. The only downside was that the conquest mode, some people that weren't into conquest felt like they were kind of forced to play it in order to unlock the collectibles, like a lot of some of the hidden stuff that the game had. And then on top of that, because it was the only way to unlock it, and on top of that, conquest mode back in the day, because it just didn't look up to par with the rest of the game, just basically like was frowned upon because it just didn't look very good, and from an RPG standpoint, it didn't match other RPGs or whatever it was. But I mean, to this day, Mortal Kombat fans will still praise it and they'll still love it. And looking at what they provided, it's like, why not, dude? So, and it kept the story moving forward. Again, you got to talk to so many characters and shit. And as simple of a concept as it was, and even in execution, it's like, it was a lot of fun. Like when I got into Conquest, I actually enjoyed it. I didn't think I would, but I ended up enjoying it more than I thought I would. I enjoyed the sound effects. I enjoyed the themes, and I enjoyed the fact that you can go to visit 6 different realms, talk to multiple characters and stuff like that, or how they would react. Collecting stuff. I mean, again, this would be a game that I would complete once more, because again, it was Mortal Kombat, and it was the first. Again, this is another reason why I'm doing this. Mortal Kombat was like one of those first games that that got me to like to do things in games that I normally wouldn't do, because I was never a completionist beforehand. It was Mortal Kombat that kind of got me started on all that kind of stuff. So and if you think about it, with NetherRealm, this is when they really started adding. I mean, granted, NetherRealm, well, back then they were Midway, but it doesn't matter. They were always known to add content into their games, but with Mortal Kombat Deception, this is like when it really started. Like, if you think about it, this is when it really started. And I mean, for your you know, back then games were worth 50, so like for your $50, bro, I mean, you were totally into this game. There was no way that you wouldn't be. Mortal Kombat Deception was just so good. So good. You couldn't help but absolutely love, like, the gameplay improvements, the extra content. The stage fatalities were brought back in the form of death traps. I mean, you could be eaten by piranha, you know, smashed by all sorts of different shit. I mean, you name it, man. This game had it all. Everything that you loved about Mortal Kombat was in it. And especially if you love Deadly Alliance, and if you love the classic Mortal Kombat games, this was like a combination of both those things, and then some, because of all the 2 different kinds of side games or mini games, and then the conquest mode being a game in and of itself. Are you kidding me? So yeah, I mean, Mortal Kombat Deception is, there's a reason why this game is my number 10 of my top 10 personal greatest fighting games of all time. So there's a reason why this is number 10. It really was one of the best Mortal Kombat games ever. I mean, seriously. I mean, like, I just can't. I can't say enough good things about MK Deception. Obviously, the developers had more time to add all this content in, because with Deadly Alliance, they had to build the engine, because they were going in a different direction gameplay wise. So they were going full on 3D. So with this game, all they had to do was make the engine better and refine it and just improve it, as opposed to building it from scratch, which would leave them plenty of time to do all this other content. And they had 2 years to make this game after the release of the previous game, because Deadly Alliance was released in 2004, 2002, and then Deception was released in 2004. And in those 2 years, they did a lot, man. They added in a whole other game mode. They added in all that that content, the 2 other mini games, and all that stuff. Like, seriously, it was absolutely like, it was one of the my experience of Mortal Kombat Deception had been some of the most happiest times I ever had in Mortal Kombat. And the game retained so much of that Mortal Kombat magic while giving us a different feel because of the 3D and stuff like that. So I just absolutely loved, and I also loved the character design as well. Like, look at Ermac here. I mean, he's always been a cool character, but I like what they did with him. I thought it was really cool. Gave him a lot more of a personality. He wasn't just the red ninja anymore, you know? So yeah, really cool. And then the story was really unique. And we also got to see a darker side of Raiden with a different costume and shit like that. I mean, and of course there were a lot of throwback arenas and stuff like that were brought back, like Portal 2, and then the music from Mortal Kombat 2's Portal 2 was there. I mean, seriously, just there were throwbacks as well into this game, which I personally appreciated so much. It combined both of those generations of Mortal Kombat together that I, as a Mortal Kombat fan, just truly appreciated more than anything. I thought it was literally like such a treat. So ultimately, MK Deception was some of the best times I ever had playing Mortal Kombat, and was my favorite 3D fighting game of Mortal Kombat. So what came after Deception? Well, there was Mortal Kombat Armageddon, which was basically Mortal Kombat, the next generation Mortal Kombat trilogy, so to speak, but in 3D form, right? It had the same engine as Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance and Deception, except obviously they kept on making improvements to that with a parry system and some air fighting combo, some air combos and stuff like that you could do. But they brought back Conquest, except this time it was linear, and you got to play as 2 other characters. And because the roster was so big, I mean, every single Mortal Kombat character that ever existed was in this game, you know, no matter what. And because of that, they couldn't give everybody their own fatalities. So what they had to do was they had to do a creative fatality mode, which was basically the same for every Mortal Kombat character. So it was kind of like a combo fatality sort of thing. And it was just no. Creative fatality, unfortunately, sounded good on paper, but execution was just no different for any other fighter. So, which kind of sucked. It took a lot of that, oh, what's he going to do sort of feeling out of here, you know? And it took the uniqueness away from characters. But again, because of the amount of fighters that would be in there, plus their limits probably would just be like, yeah, it would be one of the downsides. But despite the fact that Conquest was a little bit more linear and stuff like that, it was still solid. And it did tell a story. It was about 2 brothers that were, you know, brothers of the Elder Gods, you know, kids from the Elder Gods, Taven and Dagon. But it wasn't as, but fans didn't like it as well as they liked the original Mortal Kombat Conquest from Deception, I guess. But they also had another mode called Motor Combat, and Motor Combat is basically, like Mortal Kombat's version of Mario Kart. And a lot of players like that. I think that's the second most requested game mode that they would like to come back at any point in time. Ed Boon stated that they could have made that game its own game if they wanted to, but like there were hazards on the levels and stuff like that where there would be crashes and fatalities and stuff like that. That'd be kind of cool. And of course, miniature versions of characters and stuff like that. But that was unique. And of course, the story of Mortal Kombat, and of course the characters they had their own endings, but they wouldn't have like the same kind of endings as before. Again, because of their ambition and because of their place and their time constraints, Mortal Kombat Armageddon just, I think it came out in 2007, which was a year right after Shaolin Monks. So they basically didn't have that much time. So they ended up making Mortal Kombat Armageddon as kind of like the next generation Mortal Kombat trilogy. And it just, yeah. Because Shaolin Monks came out in 2006, and I'm going to talk about Shaolin Monks here in a second. So, but yeah, Mortal Kombat Armageddon also had a really cool cutscene to where you had like the good guys and bad guys going at it against each other, and the combatants just became way too powerful. And then Blaze was introduced as the final boss, which looked really cool, and then with the pyramid and stuff like that. And yeah, So, but yeah, lots of throwbacks, lots of cool stuff. But ultimately, Mortal Kombat Deception just didn't hit home. I'm sorry, Mortal Kombat Armageddon just didn't hit home as much. But yeah, it is what it is. It was the next generation Mortal Kombat trilogy, and they improved on the gameplay. They added in obviously more arenas and stage fatalities and stuff like that. But again, you could tell it was just limited compared to Deception and all that stuff. But anyway, Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks came out in 2006, and it wasn't a fighting game. It was an action adventure game told during the Mortal Kombat 2 era, and you played as Liu Kang and Kung Lao, and oh my goodness, was this game an absolute gem. I even debated on getting it because I knew it wouldn't be a fighting game and stuff like that, but I still got it anyway because it was Mortal Kombat. And then after watching everything and seeing everything, I was, and of course, it took place during my favorite Mortal Kombat time, which was Mortal Kombat 2. Like the Mortal Kombat 2 era was my favorite time personally. So you got to play as Liu Kang and Kung Lao. It was kind of like revisiting everything all over again with nods to Mortal Kombat 2. And we're talking a lot of nods. You know, you could throw people into like stage fatalities and stuff like that. The combos would be addictive to do despite the fact that they'd be easy. You could still perform fatalities, but they'd be in the middle of gameplay in unique ways. And again, it was Mortal Kombat's way of doing an action adventure game at the time. And I guess after Deception, it's what they spent their time doing. So, and then there were boss battles, there were hidden stuff. I mean, Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks, people have been wanting a sequel, either a sequel or a remaster or a version of Shaolin Monks with Sub-Zero and Scorpion, aka Mortal Kombat Fire and Ice. Okay, they've been wanting that for a long time. I mean, can you imagine if we got like both a conquest mode, its own game, as an action RPG, Mortal Kombat style, and Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks remastered or a retail? I mean, seriously, MK Shaolin Monks was an absolute gem for every single Mortal Kombat fan, and I loved and adored it more than I thought I would. And I took it to my friend's house and we all played it together, couch co-op style. I don't know if you could play it online or not. I mean, I know it came out in 2006, which was obviously after Xbox Live had come out and stuff like that, as well as PlayStation Network, I believe, was out as well. I could be wrong, I'm not sure, maybe. But I don't know if Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks was able to be played online with somebody else, which I don't think so, which was a bummer. But if you could, that'd be great. But I took it to my friend's house and we couch co-op that thing, and man, was it a blast. Even if you were just watching it. I remember like two of my friends were playing at one point in time, and I was just chilling there eating junk food, watching them play and just enjoying watching them play it. It was absolutely like a love letter for every Mortal Kombat fan like myself. And my other two friends that weren't as big of Mortal Kombat fans as me, that wouldn't play them on a regular basis, but would be aware of them and enjoy them for what they were. They played the shit out of it. They played the absolute shit out of it, and it was just such a good time, man. Sharing the screen with two characters, and you would be taking everything out. There's so many nods to MK2, man. Oh man, Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks needs to come back. I mean, either as a remastered at first or a sequel coming out after that or whatever. Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks needs to come back. Please make it come back. It absolutely deserves it. It needs it. It's like anybody that may not know what I'm talking about that happens to be listening at this point. Well, I will make a video about Shaolin Monks, but like, go watch some gameplay of, like, let's say, if you guys are fans of any walkthrough channels and stuff like that do playthroughs with commentaries or even without commentaries, doesn't matter. Like, and if you're a Mortal Kombat fan, especially if you love Mortal Kombat 2, bro, Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks. But every Mortal Kombat fan, probably played Shaolin Monks. But at the same time, I would understand if they didn't. But Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks was a blast, man. I just couldn't. I can't stress that enough. But yeah, it was awesome. So, okay, now we're going to fast forward very briefly to Mortal Kombat versus DC Universe, which I almost got, but didn't. And the way I became aware about that game was through text message. So I was teaching martial arts at the time, and myself, the master's son, and the master, we went out of town to one of his houses that was in another state because he had property up there. It was very open, stuff like that. And we spent the weekend there. And upon the ride on my way home, I get a text message from one of my students who also happens to be a friend of mine. And he texted me and he said, the next Mortal Kombat game is called Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe. And and back then we were just limited to text messaging, right? Phones were not like they were now. I mean, well, I didn't own a BlackBerry back then either. So it's like, just no. Anyway, so he says Mortal Kombat versus DC Universe is the next Mortal Kombat game. I'm like, yeah, right. So this was during the day when I got this text message. So I texted him back and forth. Okay, cool. And then I went home. I went online, and lo and behold, he was not lying. Mortal Kombat versus DC Universe would be the next game. And I also noticed that it was a T for teen game, and it kind of just, the only part that enticed me was that it was just the Mortal Kombat characters, but it was T for teen, and there wouldn't be fatalities the way we know and love them, and it just seemed off. However, the one thing that did catch my attention was that I would notice that this would be the first fighting game that would actually have a legit true story mode, and there'd be two story modes, one from the DC perspective and one from the MK perspective. I ended up watching the story in terms of how things would unfold, but there was one time where I almost got the game because I was home bored and I did have $60 to spare, but I didn't get it. I didn't go with it. I didn't go through with it, and I just ended up just not getting it. So I don't regret that, although I would have loved to have gotten it, but I just didn't. I didn't regret it, and I just went in a different direction. So anyway, that was the story of Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe. It was the only MK game that I really didn't play, and if I did play it, I didn't, it wouldn't be anytime soon. So I don't remember it very well, but I've seen tons of gameplay on it and stuff like that, and as cool of a concept as it was, it just no, just wasn't something that I was interested in. But anyway, but the next game would more than make up for that, and it would come out in 2011. It made my list of top 10 fighting games of all time. And Mortal Kombat 9, also known as Mortal Kombat 2011 because it was just called Mortal Kombat, was literally the ultimate love letter. And as soon as I became aware of that game, I watched footage of it, like especially when E3 came around of that year, or of the time before the game's release, when E3 came out, and I saw gameplay, and I saw footage, and I saw the interview with Ed Boon. I said to myself, wow, this is like MK 1, 2, and 3 put together, but with the graphics of today, which was back then 2011. It introduced X-rays, and Marvel vs. Capcom had already come out before this game. And when this game came out, content-wise, absolutely beat the living hell out of Marvel vs. Capcom 3. And it was also the first Mortal Kombat game that was entered into the fighting game, into the competitive fighting game tournament deal. Even though it wasn't as technical. It wouldn't start getting technical until the next one, Mortal Kombat X, but we're not there yet. So when getting the game, it was absolutely full of content. There was the regular arcade ladders, right? Okay. There was a crypt. Cool. It had like the best roster of any Mortal Kombat game to date, which a lot of people would say, and I agree with. It was the first time we would get DLC characters post-launch. Characters like Freddy Krueger, to name one. It was, it had all the content in there. So you also had another arcade ladder, which was like 300. And if you beat all three of them, which it was a challenge tower, so of 300. So if you actually ended up getting all 300, you would get like the ultimate prize, as they would call it, would be an almost naked Melina. So, and yes, I did beat that. I beat all challenges. And I got like almost every achievement for that game. The story mode was literally a retelling of Mortal Kombat's 1, 2, and 3, which I absolutely loved and adored and played the living shit out of. And that was the first way I would play the game. I just loved it. Loved it, adored it, to the max. And then there was also the online fighting part and secrets, fatalities, the X-ray moves. This game had it all. And it came at a perfect time to where fans were like ready for it, and it was just a blast. The characters looked great. They played great. It was also a return to full 2D gameplay, by the way. You know, the graphics look great and stuff like that, but in terms of gameplay, that's when they went back to 2D. And there was even 2-on-2 tag fighting mode. And obviously, the introduction to X-rays was also a big highlight, because it's like, what can we do with gore? So it's like they ended up doing that, which was cool. So Mortal Kombat 2011 was so great, so memorable, so full of content that kept you coming back to play again and again and again. So much to do, so many things to unlock. There were coins that got you to unlock stuff and everything. I mean, and different ways to play. They had like a tournament mode to where you'd have spectators and stuff like that, and then you would participate, you know, kind of like a bracket form and stuff. I mean, there were just so many things in this game, and I loved every second of it. I did. And it was a time to where I would stop playing whatever else I played because this game was out, and I 100% focused on this game until it was like completely done, until I had enough. And it was just a blast to be able to play my favorite fighting game series and franchise of all time in story mode. And that was like my biggest highlight as well. It's like, wow, we're literally getting a retelling of MK1, 2, and 3 from the developers themselves in a movie-like form, and it's like, wow. So yeah, anyway, that was Mortal Kombat 9, also known as Mortal Kombat 2011. And before we get into Mortal Kombat X, my ass needs some water. Ooh, cheers to your health. So, Mortal Kombat X would come out. Well, I remember seeing Ed Boon, you know, tweeting stuff, right? Because they were also making Injustice and everything like that. So, Mortal Kombat X would kind of get teased by Ed Boon. And then finally, the trailer was released. And, you know, people just didn't like the music of that trailer, but the trailer looked pretty badass. And it was the first game that would be on the PS4 and the Xbox One, which meant it would look really good. It would be really graphically impressive. But we wouldn't get gameplay until E3, which would be a while after that announcement trailer. Which, in typical NetherRealm fashion, you would basically get hints during that trailer. But anyway, E3 would come along, and during the PlayStation press conference, the trailer would be shown. And when you saw everything, you were like, obviously certain features would return. Obviously, it was a 2D game in terms of fighting. There would obviously be new characters and stuff like that. Cool. And the X-rays would make a return. Cool. But this time, the fatalities would be absolutely insane. This is when the fatalities absolutely started to go nuts. And the gameplay itself actually got more technical, and Mortal Kombat X actually ended up being that game to where it's like, okay, this is truly a competitive type of fighting game or whatnot. So that's what they did with Mortal Kombat X. And again, the story mode would continue from where it left off. But the thing is, with Mortal Kombat X, what they did was they introduced the next generation of characters. So certain characters from the previous games would have kids. So that's the direction that they would head in. And obviously you would have online and different ways to play online, and everything you do would count towards your faction points. They'd had like factions to where you could choose one of, you know, many types of factions. And everything you do, whether you play online or offline, or the different towers that they would introduce, like you'd be gaining points to your factions, right? Beating other people from other people from different factions would get you more points and stuff. It's like, again, very content rich, and it continued the Mortal Kombat legacy. And in terms of where the story would go, would be kind of interesting, especially with the next generation of characters. And obviously, not every fan will agree in terms of which direction Mortal Kombat would head in terms of the story. But one thing that I particularly like is the fact that Scorpion and Sub-Zero are no longer enemies. You know, they're allies at this point, which is great. You know, especially since we find out later on that, you know, Quan Chi was behind all that trouble in the first place. But other than that, it was cool to see that. And it was cool to see Johnny Cage mature a little bit. So, I would have to say that I absolutely just adored what they did with the game, because we would get more DLC characters. You mean you'd have like Alien, Predator, and you know, Jason Voorhees and all that. Like, this game just did everything to appease like everybody. Even the fighting game community, the competitive fighting game community, was really happy with this game. But the only thing that I would say is that, like, some people would just, you know, disagree in terms of where the story would go. You know, like, you know, obviously it's really cool that Johnny Cage and Sonya Blade did hook up and did have a daughter and all that stuff. So, but the thing is, from a story perspective, some fans would disagree in terms of where it's heading. But at the same time, things can always change. It is Mortal Kombat after all. You know, who's dead doesn't have to always be dead. I mean, it doesn't always happen that way. But yeah, with Mortal Kombat X, a lot of people were very happy with that game, and of course, some people were not happy. But overall, Mortal Kombat X was a very big success, and like, any Mortal Kombat fan should be like really, really pleased with what they've done with that kind of game, and the story mode production and everything like that. It's just absolutely incredible. And then of course you got new characters like Aaron Black, you know, Scarlet, which was, you know, kind of a glitch in one of the older Mortal Kombat games that fans just called Scarlet, and then all these years later they would make a character called Scarlet because of that. It's just awesome, man. It's just really awesome. And then of course in 2019 they announced Mortal Kombat 11 in a very interesting way at the Game Awards. Best sports or racing game comes up. Ed Boon is supposed to announce the winners, and then all of a sudden, bam! They surprise people with a trailer, and which would also include time travel in terms of going back to different eras, and you know, lots of throwbacks in terms of in terms of costumes and stuff like that. And just like in MKX, they brought back the styles. Like, there's 3 different variations per character, which right now fans are starting to get tired of, and they don't want that anymore. And I think they've already announced that they wouldn't do that anymore. New and returning characters and all that stuff. And the Crypt is turning into like its own action adventure type of mode at this point, which is really close to like a conquest mode at this point, or an RPG conquest mode, which, you know, they're hinting at. They're just getting better at all the time. The online netcode is really improved. With Mortal Kombat X, it ended up starting out bad, and then they improved that. And which a lot of credit goes to Killer Instinct, because Killer Instinct had some of the best online netcode for fighting game. And with Mortal Kombat, it started out rough, and then it got better after that. But with Mortal Kombat 11, like, their games are just continuing to look better and better. The story mode, in terms of where they're going now, is that Liu Kang is taking Raiden's place. You know, there was Kronika. I mean, Raiden ended up, you know, getting pissed off and then taking care of Shinnok, and then Kronika, who is basically Shinnok's mother, who is higher than an elder god and who's, you know, more powerful, is basically controls time. And there was also another aftermath of DLC with Shang Tsung, also voiced by Kerry Tagawa, and then there was the mocap that looked like him and everything. Man, a nod to the first movie and everything. I mean, Spawn finally made his appearance as a DLC character. We had Terminator in there. You had RoboCop. It's like, the friendships look great. It was just like, dude, like the game just looked terrific. From a competitive standpoint, a lot of fans were not very happy because it was slower and the combos just weren't as much. There wasn't as much meat on the bone in terms of the speed and in terms of what you could do compared to Mortal Kombat X. But I think they did that on purpose in order to appease the casual audience, and then customization was up, similar to Injustice, but even better. But and then they introduced different gameplay mechanics like the fatal blow, which kind of replaced the X-ray. Like once you got down to like, I don't know, like 15% or something like that on your power bar or in your health bar, you would, you could activate the fatal blow, or your opponent could activate the fatal blow on you or whatnot. So again, just one way or another, I mean, this game had content in it, and a lot of it, and I'm always very impressed with what NetherRealm has been able to do, but I really want to know what direction they're going to take the series now, because Liu Kang, if they go with this story, Liu Kang has basically taken Raiden's place, and Raiden is now mortal. Sonya Blade died in the beginning of the story, so there's a lot that's been going on. So and we're starting to wonder now who's going to make a return, why or why not. And the thing is, with Mortal Kombat, when you got characters that die but don't really die, it's like, who will make a return? So it's really interesting and curious nonetheless. I'm very curious and open to see what direction they're going to go in, because everybody's expecting Mortal Kombat 12, but I would personally love it if it was, I don't know, if it was like an action RPG thing, but apparently it's going to be Mortal Kombat 12. And I'm really curious what NetherRealm is going to, what they're going to do with it, because ever since after Mortal Kombat 9 of 2011, I've kind of been sitting on the sidelines and just kind of watching. I've just been playing other different games, and my biggest area of interest with games has been in other areas at this point, and with different genres of games. However, I've always had my eye on Mortal Kombat. Always, especially since one of my favorite content creators, Maximilian Dude, keeps up with this stuff. So now, if Conquest Mode makes a return, I mean, it's obviously my most anticipated game. If there's a handful of things that they do, it's going to be one of my most anticipated games. And again, I'm very much looking forward to seeing where they go from a story perspective, because one of the things that draws me to Mortal Kombat is the lore, is the story perspective. And that's one of the reasons why I always keep my eye on it, even though I basically have also backed up from fighting games, because I mean, they've just gotten too technical at this point for me, and they weren't as technical when I played the hell out of them. I mean, even Mortal Kombat 9 wasn't as technical, but it got there. It made it there. And then obviously Mortal Kombat X, there was, so it is what it is, but I still enjoyed the game for what it was. I still enjoy the games for what they are. I'm still interested in the story. I love this franchise, and I really am curious to what they'll go with it. And I can't wait for them to make like a different version of Mortal Kombat, man. Bring back Shaolin Monks too. I mean, bring us a Conquest Mode, all that stuff. I mean, my goodness. So, okay. In conclusion, Mortal Kombat, to me, hopefully by now you'll realize that it was an absolute gem of a series. I absolutely enjoy playing those games. I adore the games. I think that they are some of the best fighting games ever made, and for a multitude of reasons. And to this day, I am still very interested in terms of what's going to happen with Mortal Kombat. I can't wait till we get some sort of reveal, an official reveal, which should be happening any day now, according to. But at the same time, I've also been hearing rumors that it's been delayed. Like we might not get like some sort of reveal until May. So hopefully Mortal Kombat 12 doesn't suffer the same fate that some of these other games have been suffering, like releasing incomplete or unfinished with drop frame rates and all that kind of stuff, because NetherRealm Studios, to me, is like one of those rare studios to when they release a product, it's always legit. Like, for instance, Sony Santa Monica is another one with God of War. NetherRealm is another one with their Mortal Kombat series or Injustice series. So hopefully that stays the same, and hopefully that's what happens. I want the game to be complete when it releases. So, but yeah, that is my history with Mortal Kombat. Yes, I have seen Mortal Kombat Annihilation. Yes, I've seen the Mortal Kombat Legacy stuff. Yes, I've seen the Mortal Kombat the new Mortal Kombat movie, and no, I don't think it's as good as the original. I'm sorry. I'm not being biased. I mean, it sounds like I am, but I'm not. I don't think it's as good. I just don't. There's a lot of Mortal Kombat's spirit that's missing from that. So I to me it just didn't hold up as well as I would have wanted it to. Um, but hopefully maybe the next one will be better, you know, because especially if the second one, uh, if there is a Mortal Kombat tournament in the second one, then okay. So we'll see what direction they go with it. But the original 1995 is still better in my opinion. Still. So overall, that's my Mortal Kombat history in a nutshell. The majority of the time that I played it was, you know, during everything from the early 90s to the late 90s, and then early to mid 2000s. And then in 2011, I spent a shit ton of time playing MK9. And then after that, I just kind of been keeping my eyes on the game. I have played Mortal Kombat 11. I have played Mortal Kombat X, but just not nearly as long or as dedicated. I mean, not even close to like what the other games were. But I'm still keeping an eye on the story. I'm still interested in what direction they're going to go. And depending on what direction they go, we'll see. We will see. But one way or another, Mortal Kombat holds a special place in my heart. It always has. It always will. Will I make a return to the franchise in terms of excuse me, in terms of playing it after all this time? I mean, it really just depends. It depends on my mood. There's just so many different games to play, and I've just been interested in so many different games. And it's like, you know, I still have a soft spot for fighting games, but they're just not as appealing as they were. But at one point, but with that being said, if there's a conquest mode for Mortal Kombat coming out, and especially if it's similar as Shaolin Monks, oh boy, then yeah, I'll definitely be getting Mortal Kombat 12 like for myself, and I will play the shit out of it. You know, the story mode, the conquest mode, and all that stuff. But I won't dare go online and fight anybody. I'll do the arcade ladders. I'll do the story mode, and I'll do the conquest mode, and then that will be a wrap. You know, in terms of online, forget it. Gotten too technical, and it's different now. You know, it doesn't tickle my fancy like it once did. You know, I don't get that hint of dopamine like I once did. So the only hint of dopamine that I'd be getting is the hits of dopamine that I'd be getting is from the conquest mode and from, you know, just completing the game from arcade ladders and seeing all the different character endings. So that way I would find out, as well as the story mode, as I would find out what would happen, and just unlocking all the extra content from playing conquest or whatnot. So yeah, that's yeah. That is my story and my history with Mortal Kombat, and I hope you enjoyed it. So but yeah, let me know down in the comment section if you are into Mortal Kombat, or if you've been playing it long enough and all that kind of stuff. Let me know, because I'm very interested to see like everybody's different points of view, and which Mortal Kombat game is your favorite, and what do you guys think is going to happen with Mortal Kombat 12. So with that being said, I am out. I hope you enjoyed this. And oh, one more thing. Yes, I did watch the Mortal Kombat Conquest TV series that came out in 1998 that would usually air right after wrestling, after Monday Night Nitro. And yes, I do own the DVD for all those. But yeah, not really too much to say about that, other than I enjoyed it for what it was. There were some episodes that were absolutely excellent, and then there were some other episodes where it was like, what the hell are you doing? Too bad it never got picked up for a second season, because at the end it was really unique, because Raiden actually got tricked by Shao Kahn. But anyway, but yeah, that concludes this entire episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and I believe this is right now the longest commentary I have ever done. And I enjoyed every second of it, and I hope you enjoyed listening as much as I enjoyed talking. So I'll catch you guys on the next one. Enjoy the rest of your day and or night or weekend, and I'll see you.